Liberty DeVitto played on 22 of Billy Joel's 23 top 40 hits. He didn't just play them, he built them, arranged them, bled for them. 30 years of sold-out stadiums, platinum records, and Grammy Awards. And when it was all over, he didn't even get a phone call. When he tried to find out why, the entire tour staff was too scared to speak his name. And when Joel was finally cornered about it publicly, he didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He leaned into a microphone and issued a threat. Said if Liberty ever told the real story, it would ruin his life. Think about what that means. Not, we grew apart. Not, it was time for a change. A threat from one of the wealthiest musicians on the planet, directed at the man who helped him get there. The bassist who got discarded first put a gun to his head. The guitarist found out he was fired by hearing a stranger announce it on the radio. And Liberty spent 15 years watching the royalty checks disappear while the records he built kept selling millions. Something happened inside Billy Joel's operation. Something that turned a brotherhood into a corporate hit list. Something that left one man broke, one man dead, and a third one silenced with a threat. One of them got the stadiums. One got a warning to keep his mouth shut. This is the story they didn't want told.
The drums, that's Liberty DeVitto.
It started in the late 1960s at a Long Island club called My House. Billy Joel was a teenager searching for a sound, and Liberty walked in, hitting hard, playing aggressive, playing like he had something to prove. Joel knew immediately. By the mid-70s, Liberty's band Topper became the backbone of Joel's entire operation. Producer Phil Ramone called them the Lords of 52nd Street. They were a family. Ramone was Uncle Phil. These weren't hired guns. These were the men who actually built the records. And Liberty didn't just play what was written, he shaped what got recorded. When Joel brought in an early reggae version of Only the Good Die Young, Liberty threw his sticks down and refused, demanded the rock shuffle. That shuffle turned a novelty idea into a radio staple that got the song banned by the Catholic Church. Just the Way You Are won 2 Grammys, Record and Song of the Year, and the drum part Liberty played on it became known as the hardest easy beat in rock. Scenes from an Italian restaurant was built on the road over months of live shows before they ever stepped into a studio. And Piano Man, Liberty didn't play on the original 1973 recording, but for the next 30 years, every time Joel sat down at that piano in front of a sold-out crowd, Liberty was behind the kit. He didn't record the song that made Joel famous. He performed it thousands of times to millions of people. There's an argument his version is the one the world actually knows. That's what 30 years looks like. That's what the Lords of 52nd Street built. Then 1989 happened, and it all came apart. Frank Weber wasn't just Billy Joel's manager, he was family, the brother of Joel's first wife, Elizabeth. When Joel and Elizabeth divorced in 1982, most people would have cleaned house. Instead, Joel kept Weber on, gave him full managerial control, and handed him power of attorney over his entire financial operation. Weber was also the godfather to Joel's daughter, Alexa. This was as deep inside the circle as anyone could get. The first red flags came on a drive through Maine with Christy Brinkley. Locals kept approaching them, convinced Joel owned luxury properties and racehorses in the area. He didn't, or at least he didn't know he did. Brinkley turned to Joel immediately, told him Weber was ripping him off. Joel didn't want to hear it. Weber had become, in his own words, a confidant, a trusted advisor. He trusted Weber more than he trusted his own wife. Then Joel tried to renovate a house and couldn't access the money. People in the industry kept asking him the same question. You just had all these hit records, where's all your money? He didn't have an answer, so he authorized an audit. And what came back was devastating.
Joel charges a 1989 audit shows Weber grossly misused Billy's money, issuing loans of up to $1 million to himself and wife Lucille, while signing Billy's name to them using the power of attorney. Some loans, mostly from record companies, were secured with copyrights from Billy Joel's songs, and many of those copyrights are still mortgaged.
Weber had allegedly spent over $10 million of Joel's money on speculative investments, many involving his own companies. He handed out $2.5 million in unauthorized loans to horse breeding farms, real estate partnerships, and oil and gas shelters he personally controlled. He double-billed Joel for music videos. He skimmed travel and accounting expenses. And most audaciously of all, he mortgaged Joel's song copyrights for $15 million without telling him. His own songs, his life's work, used as collateral without his knowledge or consent. On top of everything, Joel discovered he owed the IRS $5 million he didn't have. Joel filed a $90 million lawsuit in 1989. His attorney called it the worst case of management fraud he had ever seen in his career. But the $90 million never came. Weber filed for bankruptcy in 1990 and the case settled out of court. Joel walked away with roughly $8 million. He sued for $90 million and got $8 million back. Then Weber had the nerve to countersue Joel for $30 million in unpaid management fees. That suit was thrown out, and just to make sure the wound never fully closed, Joel had to turn around and sue his own lawyer, Alan Grubman, for fraud in 1992. The man got robbed twice. Joel described it in one sentence: "I gotta start all over again." And that's the context for everything that happened to the band next. Joel was financially exposed, humiliated, and surrounded by lawyers and accountants who had one job: control the damage. And the first thing they did was look at the people around him. The lords of 52nd Street were no longer family. They were a line item. Guitarist Russell Javers didn't get a meeting, didn't get a phone call. He found out he was replaced by hearing Joel's new lineup announced on the radio. Bassist Doug Stegmeyer was eased out just as quietly. No conversation, no severance, just gone. Liberty survived the first purge, but the terms changed immediately. His royalty percentage, the cut he had earned on over a decade of hit records, was stripped away, replaced by a flat salary. The message from the new corporate structure was clear: you're an employee now, act like it. The personal betrayal came later and hit harder. In 2004, Billy Joel married Katie Lee. He invited his friends, his family, his inner circle. And Liberty, the man who had been at his side for 30 years, who had played on 22 of his 23 top 40 hits, who had bled for every record they made together, was not on the guest list. Now look, we've all been left off a wedding invite. Maybe you forgot to RSVP. Maybe the venue had a capacity limit. But this wasn't your cousin's backyard barbecue wedding. This was Billy Joel. He could have found Liberty a seat. The message wasn't logistical. It was deliberate. And Liberty got it loud and clear. 2 years later, he was off the tour entirely. No meeting, no phone call. When he called the tour manager begging for answers, he got nothing. The entire staff reportedly lived in a climate of fear. Nobody was talking. Nobody was willing to question the man whose name was on the marquee. 2 theories circulated about why he was cut. The first, that he had confronted Joel directly about his drinking, and Joel never forgave him for it. The second, that Joel suspected him of spreading rumors about infidelity during his marriage to Christy Brinkley. Liberty denied it. The truth probably died in the silence between them. By 2009, the silence became a lawsuit. Liberty sued Joel and Sony for unpaid royalties on 11 classic albums spanning a decade. It wasn't just business. He had been financially wrecked by a divorce. He had reportedly reached out to Joel for help and been met with a response described as pissed off. The man who helped build a 9-figure empire was asking for help and getting anger in return. So he went to court. And Joel's response in a 2013 interview wasn't to defend himself. It was to warn him. Said telling the real story would ruin Liberty's life. That's not a denial. That's a weapon. Hanging over all of it was something darker. Doug Stegmeyer, the bassist quietly pushed out years earlier, died by suicide in 1995. Liberty and Javors both pointed at the same wound. that the depression that consumed Stegmeyer was tied to being discarded, to watching the records he helped create generate millions while he got nothing, to being erased from a story he helped write. Nobody said it was Joel's fault, but nobody looked away from it either. 15 years after the firing, Liberty admitted the estrangement was eating him alive. In 2020, he made the call. The two men sat down at a diner in Florida and talked. Not about the lawsuits, not about the money, about their families, about the good times. The formal end to the war came in an unexpected form.
This has gone on too long. We're too old. People around us are dying. You know, we were so close. We were closer than brothers, you know, and we created something that the world embraced. I remember telling my friends after me and Billy got together again, somebody told me, he goes, "We're so thankful that you guys got together again, because it would have been such a waste to think that the music that of our childhood ended with two guys hating each other."
Joel wrote the foreword to Liberty's memoir, Liberty, Life, Billy, and the Pursuit of Happiness. It wasn't a reunion, they haven't played together, but the litigation ended and something resembling respect took its place. The scar is still there though. 30 years of brotherhood, ended with silence, escalated to a courtroom, quietly resolved over diner coffee. The drummer who built the sound never got the credit. The bassist who helped write the hits died broke and forgotten. And the man whose name was on everything walked away clean. So where are they now? Liberty is still playing. At 74 years old, he's out there doing it the hard way, running drum clinics, playing with his band the Lords of 52nd Street, alongside former Joel bandmates Richie Cannata and Russell Javers, keeping the music alive on his own terms. No arenas, no corporate machine, just the guys who actually built the sound, playing the songs they helped create, to crowds who still show up to hear them. Billy Joel is not on stage. In May 2025, at 76 years old, Joel was diagnosed with normal pressure hydrocephalus, a brain condition where fluid builds up and disrupts balance, hearing, and vision. His doctors told him performing was making it worse.
I feel fine.
Oh, okay.
My balance sucks. It's like being on a boat. It used to be called water on the brain. Now it's called hydrocephalus, normal pressure hydrocephalus.
Normal pressure hydrocephalus happens when too much fluid builds up around the brain. Joel canceling his tour in May after he was diagnosed with a condition that affects his hearing, his vision, and even his balance. Seen here falling on stage at a show in Connecticut earlier this year.
He canceled every concert through July 2026. The Madison Square Garden residency that made him a New York institution again, gone. The co-headline stadium tour with Sting and Rod Stewart, canceled. He released an HBO documentary, dropped a 100-track digital album with 8 previously unheard songs, and made a brief appearance alongside a tribute band in January 2026. But the stages are dark. The man whose name was on everything is sitting at home recovering. The man he fired without a phone call is still out there playing. Make of that what you will.
Smash that subscribe button right now. Don't just sit there. Join the crew, stay locked in, and let's keep the beat alive.